Okay, so our project is on depictions of martyrdom, and this is kind of mid to late medieval art, Gothic art, all the way through kind of Baroque art. So, yes. So, in this project, we take a closer look at the depictions of saints spanning approximately 4 centuries. Um, similarly to the way in which Jesus' crucifixion gets progressively more gory and sentient of death, similar pattern can be charted with the martyred saints. The medieval artwork was crass and dealt with death, but it lacked realism and dimension. But as the Renaissance happened and linear perspective was it started to be used, the pain and the suffering of the martyrs becomes more real to us. And for artists obsessed with the human body, like many of these artists that we will be talking about, depictions of martyrdom are a compelling way to explore the limits of the body through painting or sculpture, which is also a common theme in the Renaissance. There is a deep fascination with the human body present in this project. And in addition, the focus on the gore, more or less, is less to describe the shock factor, but instead a way to track artists' philosophical shift in realizing that the human experience is very complex and layered. God is still present in these later artworks, but there's a sense of impending death and doom that is not present in works pre-Renaissance. So now we go to pre-Renaissance.
This is our first painting. It is the St. Catherine of Alexandria with Donor. It is located in the Museo dell'Opera del Duomo di Firenze, and it is a gold ground panel that depicts St. Catherine of Alexandria with an unknown donor, both of which whom are praying. This painting is attributed to the Florentine painter Bernardo Daddi and was painted around the mid-14th century. It originally adorned the first pillar to the right of the entrance to the cathedral. According to the legend, St. Catherine is the daughter of King Costas and was a virgin and a martyr who resided in Alexandria of Egypt between the 3rd century and early 4th. She is depicted standing facing the front, her face framed by an elegant hairstyle and is topped with a crown. She is wearing a pink gown and a mantle of the same color, both of which are decorated with gold adornments. At her feet, to her left side, underneath a fold in the mantle, is an unknown donor that she appears to be sheltering. He is kneeling in prayer at a much smaller scale and is dressed in more contemporary clothing. There's a later edition of the Medici Code of Arts that is visible below her. It is unlikely to be connected to the person who commissioned this piece and is likely to have been added on later on. Behind her, there are truth's wheels, which is the instrument of torture that, of course, according to the legend, she was subjected to be bound to before they broke. And above her, in a clover leaf-shaped insert, is Christ and blessing. Her right hand holds the palm of martyrdom, and the left holds a book, which is another symbol of her Christian wisdom. According to the hagiographic tradition, she triumphed in dispute over some pagan scholars that were part of Emperor Maximinus's court, which is the reason she is considered the patron saint of students and teachers. She has a very sort of square and mathematical way about her, which we see quite often in these early works. The painting is in an odd shape. It is sort of like a crayon, if I am to be honest. And our next artwork is another artwork of St. Catherine, the St. Catherine of Alexandria with donor. It is located also in the Museo dell'Opera del Duomo di Firenze. It is an altarpiece that depicts St. Catherine of Alexandria being venerated by 3 donors, and on either side are scenes from her life. It was originally from the Chieri Chapel and was commissioned by Nofrit di Giovanni di Bartolomeo di Biascere in 1730 from the Tuscan painter Giovanni del Borno. The legend of St. Catherine was that of an educated young Christian princess who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, between the 3rd and 4th century. She was martyred by being beheaded at the age of 18 because she refused to worship pagan gods and marry the emperor. Her execution was by a spiked breaking wheel, but it broke when she had touched it. This series of events in her life are depicted on either side of the painting in 8 separate rectangles framing her. In the middle of the painting, she sits upon a throne where she is crowned and dressed in rich gold embroidered silk, holding a book in her one hand. At her feet sat the patron who commissioned the work, Nofriti, and further below him sat his 2 sons, named Bartolomeo and Giovanni. All 3 of them had their hands clasped together in prayer, and they were a prominent family in Renaissance Florence. In Nofriti's will, it states that the painting was hung in the cathedral inside of the chapel of the family, across from the canon's door. On the top of her head are 2 circles, and inside those 2 circles are the 2 apostles, Bartholomew and John, who were the patron saints of Nofriti's 2 sons. Underneath on the bottom reads an inscription, "Here is Nofriti Bichetti and Messere Bartolomeo and Giovanni, his sons." This painting has slowly moved on from that odd shape that we saw earlier. It is an official square. It does still hold sort of that crayon shape with the very stark tower in the middle, and it keeps sort of in theme with the clover shapes holding both of the saints. The third painting we have today is the beheading of St. John the Baptist. It is located in the Museo dell'Opera del Duomo di Firenze, and it is attributed to the artist Antonio Vinciano and is dated to the first quarter of the 15th century. At this point in time, the painting would have been executed in a rare technique of tempera on canvas, which is a medium that was uncommon in Italy at the time. The unusual support and format of the painting suggests it was originally meant for a personal or liturgically purposes, possibly as some part of a ceremonial banner. It is in the traditional square shape, so there's nothing too odd about it, but it was getting to be more normal to be square at this point in time. The subject of the painting is the martyrdom of St. John the Baptist, who was the patron saint of Florence, and this suggests that the painting might have belonged to the canons of the baptistry, which is dedicated to him, and that it was likely displayed during major celebrations, especially on June 24th. The martyrdom of St. John the Baptist is rendered with dramatic intensity. In the Gospels of Mark and Matthew, the saint was beheaded at the behest of King Herod. He denounced the king for entering into an unlawful marriage, and in the painting, the saint's body is depicted on all fours on the cross, and in coarse camel skins he is covered. There's a huge stream of blood gushing from his neck, and his head is lying on the ground. The head is seen as a profile and is encircled by a golden halo, and right behind him is the figure of the executioner. The upright man against a dark background is depicted as calmly sheathing his sword after the execution of the saint below him. This is where we really start to see the sort of goriness of the saints being murdered. In the former 2, which is, of course, St. Catherine of Alexandria, it does not depict her death in quite gruesome detail as this one, if at all. So this is really sort of when we see the shift into more dramatic styles of portraying saintdom and everything.
Okay, and now we move on to the High Renaissance and Baroque pieces of the second part. So I'm talking about the Martyrdom of Saint Agatha first, which is by Sebastiano del Piombo, and it's from 1520. And these 3 paintings are located in the Uffizi. This painting, we shift about 2 centuries, and the style is changing a lot. We have a lot more realism, and the violence is far more extreme. This is a high Renaissance or perhaps Mannerist piece of art, and there is a lot of dramatism in this painting, especially compared to the former 3. We see emotion writhing and emotion that is writhing and inflicting itself onto the viewer. And the martyrs residing within the Catholic canon were often tortured horribly. And the story at this time of St. Agatha was not new because she lived in the 3rd century. However, the way she is being depicted is changing a lot. Usually, in her story, her breasts get cut off, and in former depictions of her, she's holding them. So we're not seeing the actual violence, but here it's about to happen, and then there's this horrible sense of suffering. And our next painting is from Saint Sebastian's Processional Gonfalon. And this is the recto side. It's a dual-sided painting, but I'm just going to be talking about the recto, which is the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian. And this is by Giovanni Antonio Bazzi, who is also known as Sodoma, and this is from 1525, so pretty similar to the first one. But what is the most interesting thing about this painting is the beauty of Saint Sebastian, and he was often regarded as a very athletic saint. So it makes sense that he's very toned and young. However, this use of realism in creating the body, I think, helps us to empathize with him more because it feels like we are seeing a real person, and not just a real person, but a beautiful young one. Um, and so he has tears running down his face, and this is just a great example of these painters learning how to really garner that emotion and just inflict it on us as the viewers. And as I said before, in the theme of martyrdom, there is this shift toward translating emotion through the movement of the body. We see that with Michelangelo. He's champion of that. And more complex facial expressions that emulate the real world. And for our last piece, we have St. Lawrence by Bernini, Gian Lorenzo Bernini from 1617. And Bernini has always been one of my favorite artists in terms of depicting martyrs. He was quite young when he created this statue. It was very early on into his career, but there's a lot of expertise in this sculpture. And this is our only sculpture, so we can still see that the same effects are being had. Bernini really knows how to make his art feel alive, and especially in this regard when we're talking about real people, or sometimes fictional, but usually real people that went through this pain. He just makes this art feel like it's alive. And actually, according to legend, to capture the right emotion on St. Lawrence's face, Bernini attempted to burn himself with smoldering ashes while drawing his own emotion on his face. So that kind of tells you how far he would go. Also, there's kind of an indiscernible line between pain and ecstasy in most of his works, but especially in this one. It's not like eyes are closed, like I'm dying. He looks up, and there's almost this moment of like pleasure, and that's a common theme, especially in these later works, and even in the three that I've just talked about. There are tears, there's shock, but it almost looks like they're enjoying it in a way, which is another conversation to be had, but it really speaks to this complexity. So, thank you very much. Just to summarize, I think this is a really interesting topic because the Baroque and Neoclassical era are full of these kind of images, and they just really almost get more disturbing, but not just that, also realistic. So, thank you very much for listening.